Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ESU Happy Hour. Today's presentation is African Americans Play the Bard with Professor Charles Dumas. My name is Elizabeth Bigelow, and I am the manager of branch services at the English-Speaking Union of the United States. I'd like to give a big thank you to the Central Pennsylvania branch, who is sponsoring today's Happy Hour. Ideas for our Happy Hour lectures come from you, our ESU members and viewers. At the end of this program, you will receive a survey where you can share your feedback on tonight's lecture, as well as any ideas for upcoming Happy Hour lectures. Before we get into the program, I wanted to note a few things about today's presentation. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the lecture. If you have a question, you can use the dedicated Q&A and chat modules that are at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Questions will be answered in the order they're received. I would also like to give a shout out to the branches with the most registered members tonight. Those branches are Central Florida, Atlanta, and Greenwich. To start us off today, I would like to introduce Jill Campbell of the Central Pennsylvania branch to start us off. Jill is the branch treasurer for the ESU Central Pennsylvania branch, as well as an arts enrichment and gifted support teacher with the State College Area School District in State College, Pennsylvania. Over the years, her high school has hosted many ESU guests, student speakers, and visiting teachers. She has coached many students who have competed in the ESU National Shakespeare Competition, students that have placed first in the Central Pennsylvania region, as well as 2 students who have placed in the top 3 at nationals. In her over 40 years of teaching, Jill has been committed to sharing the wonderful sound of the English language with her students. And I will now turn it over to Jill to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The Central Pennsylvania branch was founded in 1987 by U.S. diplomat Bob Brand and his wife Josephine, and we serve a really large geographic area in the center of our state. We reach from Pittsburgh to Reading and from Harrisburg up to the New York state line, serving teachers, students, and all of our members. In the 80s, Bob Brand was instrumental in getting the New York-based ESU Shakespeare competition to become a national competition so that it would benefit students. And our students have really been happy to participate in that competition ever since then. We, along with the National Shakespeare competition, we also really enjoy hosting English in Action programs, Wrench speakers, Walter Hines Page scholars. At one time, we hosted teachers from abroad. And most recently, we really enjoyed visiting with the Queen Six in 2019 and having them tour our state, hosting them and sharing a workshop with them. But that's enough about us. It is my very, very great pleasure today to have the honor of introducing our speaker, Professor Charles Dumas. Charles has always been a really staunch supporter of Central Pennsylvania branch and the ESU and and all of the theater organizations in our community. He is professor emeritus at the School of Theater, Penn State University, and the first tenured Black professor at the School of Theater. This year, Charles recently received the Lion's Paw Medal. This medal is given in recognition of his service above and beyond the norm to the university and its students, consistently demonstrating the values of Lion's Paw through his lifetime of work dedicated to social justice and equity. While at Penn State, Charles was co-founder of Shakespeare at the Palmer Museum at Penn State, and during his tenure, he has acted in, directed, or produced over 300 plays, films, and TV shows. Of those, he's acted in or directed 10 Shakespeare plays and won an ensemble Emmy for Separate but Equal with Sidney Poitier. Charles has been married for 52 years to Professor Joe Dumas, and I can say I've been really honored to have many opportunities to spend time with both of them. Charles has visited with, worked with, and advised many of my students, both as a guest at the high school and as a Penn State professor. And his support of our regional Shakespeare competition as judge is much appreciated, as he spends extra time sharing feedback and even coaching following the program. Finally, I can say without reservation that you're in for a real treat today. I can think of no better person to share his wealth of knowledge and experience with us. Please enjoy African Americans Play the Bard and meeting Charles Dumas.
How you doing, folks? It's like I said, Charles Dumas here. The first thing I want to start off doing is I know that the drink of the happy hour is brandy and Coke, but I want to suggest something else in line with the theme of what we're doing in Blacks in the Bard, and that is a wonderful American whiskey called Uncle Nearest 1884. For those of you who don't know who Uncle Nearest was, Uncle Nearest is the guy who taught Jack Daniels how to make booze. And someone who was out researching him, because he, went into obscurity, and obviously we know Jack Daniels didn't, found that the original place where he lived and his family was still around, decided to bring back his original recipe. I would call it bourbon, but it's not really bourbon. For those of you who know American whiskey, it's American whiskey. So for the new drink, maybe not for today because you can't run out to the liquor store while I'm talking, but Uncle Nearest and Coke. Okay. Shakespeare is the leading theatrical voice in America because of the English roots of the founders and framers, people who wrote the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. But at the time of the American formation in 1790, 1/5 of the non-indigenous population was Black. 700,000 were slaves and 50,000 were free. And because of three notions of doctrine of white supremacy, that created the justification of slavery. 700 were slaves, 50,000 were free. There were three justifications. One was Christianity. In Christianity, all people are equal under God. And the second was democracy, because all men, and by reference of women, are created equal. And then the third one is the capitalization and maximization of profits and consolidation of wealth. Because of those three things in the beginning of American formation, slavery was in place and Black people were considered inferior. Why? Because it's all right to enslave or put into bondage your horse or your sheep or your bond folks. But in this case, it was also the bond servants. So there was right from the beginning, from 1790 on, there was a separation between Black and white that was founded on slavery and founded on those three justifications in terms of the dehumanization of Black people. In 1790, New York State counted 21,000 enslaved people and 4,600 free Black people. I didn't say Mississippi. I didn't say Alabama. I didn't say Virginia or North Carolina. I said New York State had almost 22,000 enslaved Black people. So the first thing that happens before we even get into the notion of Shakespeare, which was the dominant theater, we have to get into the notion of what is American theater. Well, what is the most produced American play? Anybody know? It was Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was the most produced American play. Stage plays based on Uncle Tom's Cabin, Tom shows and coon shows began to appear while the story itself was being serialized. Now, what was Uncle Tom's Cabin about? It was about slavery. It was originally written by Harriet Beecher Stowe as an outcry against slavery. It was showing how folks were being treated under slavery, particularly in the South. And these plays, which were very political, not funny, not Shakespeare, they reflected Stowe's sentimentalized anti-slavery politics, and others, the notions, she were also put in there that came from other places because basically it was an anti-slavery. It was a show. It was an abolitionist play. Now, she never authorized dramatization of her work because of her puritanical distrust of drama, although she did see George Aiken, whose version is probably the most popular. She did see it and she liked Carolyn Howard's portrayal of Topsy. But the first really serious attempt at anything like a faithful stage adaptation was a 1-hour play in the National Theater in 1852. And it shared a bill with a blackface burlesque featuring T.D. Rice. Now, who is Rice? Rice later became the most celebrated actor to play the title role of Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin. When Rice opened in H.E. Stevens' play of Uncle Tom's Cabin in January 1854, the Spirit of the Times reviewer described him as decidedly the best impersonator of Negro character who has ever appeared in any drama. Imagine that. A white man in blackface was the best impersonator of a Negro character who has ever appeared in any drama. Now that's not unusual. A black man did not play Uncle Tom until well after the Civil War, well into the 20th century. And as a matter of fact, most of the time the Uncle Tom's Cabin plays, there were people, white men wearing blackface. And it went from being an anti-slavery play, because slavery disappeared, of course, as we know, in 1866 in the United States, to being a play about Black people. And for most of the times, it was a way of ridiculing Black people, denigrating Black people. So this notion of Blacks as the lowly, as a matter of fact, the original life was life amongst the lowly. That's what she called it before it was Uncle Tom's Cabin. That life amongst Black people had gone from being enslaved to being unempowered during the Jim Crow era. And the play still, Uncle Tom's Cabin still is today the most produced American play ever. African Americans weren't all slaves, and they weren't all in the South. And if the lingua franca and the most important theater was Shakespeare, African Americans began to participate in that process, particularly free African Americans. The African Grove Theater opened in New York City in 1821, while slavery was still going on in Virginia, in North Carolina, and South Carolina. It was founded and operated by a guy named William Alexander Brown, a free Black man from the West Indies. It opened 6 years before the final abolition of slavery in New York State, which was 1827. So while slavery was still going on, and 1/5 of the people in New York State were enslaved, Brown opened a play, a theater, that did primarily of Shakespeare and classical, what we call classical theater. It was attended by all types of Black New Yorkers, free and slave, middle class, working class, along with others, along with white folks. As a matter of fact, it drew heavily on Shakespeare with comic interventions in between. And while audience members were confined to a separate section, in the words of the theater's managements, white do not know how to conduct themselves at entertainments for ladies and gentlemen of color. So that there was a segregated theater, but it was still Shakespeare. The most popular plays were Richard III and Othello. James Hewlett was the first Black man of record to play the leading role in Othello. Now we know part of the problem with Shakespeare is that, not problem, but the reality of Shakespeare is that there are 4 really Black roles. One, of course, is Othello. Everybody knows Othello. There's also Aaron the Moor, as we know. There's also the Prince of Morocco, and so that we have Aaron and Othello and the Prince of Morocco, and we have these characters, but so there's not a lot for Blacks to play as Blacks, so Blacks played Richard III, and they played Midsummer. And Hewlett was the first man of record to play the leading role in Othello. When the Park Theater, New York's leading theater at the time, white theater, put on Richard III, starring the tradition Brutus Booth, the African company, being competitive, rented a hall next door for its own production of the same play on the same night. Theatrical competition was stiff in those days. And Stephen Price, the owner of the Park Theater, the White Theater, orchestrated and paid for, under the table, a disturbance over the rival production so that police would shut down the African Grove. Now, why did he go to that far? Because there were more people going to see the one that was happening at the African Grove. It was a more popular theater. One of the people that was there in the African Grove was a man named Ira Aldridge. He was born in 1807, died in 1867. He was an American, and he was at the African Grove, and he did some acting there. But later he left. He went off to England in 1824 and performed on the London stage and in Europe, especially in what? Shakespearean roles. He was born in New York City, and he is the only actor of African-American descent among the 33 actors of the English stage honored with bronze plaques at the Shakespeare Memorial Theater at Stratford-upon-Avon. He was especially popular not only in England, but in Prussia and Russia, where he received top honors from heads of state. He is considered, with James Hewlett, the first Black tragic actor. And he was very, very, very popular, hung out with guys like Pushkin and stuff. One of the first people that we know about, and one of the most important people to participate in the Shakespearean, the Shakespearean being performed by African Americans, was a man named Paul Robeson. Paul Robson was one of the most remarkable Americans that has ever walked the planet. He was a world-class athlete competing in four different sports. He is in the Hall of Fame for All Americans back when he was in college. He ultimately became a lawyer, went to Columbia Law School. He had one of the finest voices, one of the finest baritone-based voices that people had ever heard. So he was a wonderful, wonderful singer. And he was also an actor. And more importantly, he was also a social activist. He was probably one of the most important people in American theater, in the history of American theater, because of his relationship with somebody you may have heard of called Eugene O'Neill. Paul Robeson was the first person and the most important person. No, he wasn't the first person. He was actually the second person to play Emperor Jones, which was O'Neill's first major success in New York with the Provincetown Players. And he also played in another of O'Neill's plays called All God's Children Got Wings. And that was Robeson, who was portraying in a non-racist role a doctor who had married a white woman and created a great deal of frenzy and hysteria. Robeson also was very much involved in the struggle for social justice and human rights. He was known around the world as a singer. He was known around the world as an actor. He went to London's West End to play Othello opposite Peggy Ashcroft, who's his Desdemona. And he was the first Black actor to play Othello in Britain since Ira Aldridge. The production received mixed reviews. He was never trained as an actor. He was actually trained as a lawyer. And it was one of the most profound Othellos. I have studied it because I've had a great fortune of being able to play the role myself 3 times. But Robeson brought a kind of a dignity, not a kind of, a real dignity to Othello. He brought, with his deep voice, he created Othello as an African, not as a fool who was being tricked by Iago, as much as an African who was lost in a world not of his choosing. Robeson reprised his role of Othello at the Shubert Theater in 1943 and became the first African American to play the role with a white supporting cast on Broadway. And he toured North America with Othello in 1945. His Desdemona, Uta Hagen, became one of the world's best acting teachers and praises him for his work. After Robeson, probably the most important Black Othello was a guy named William Marshall. And he's not necessarily known for his roles in Black theater and Blacks doing Shakespeare. He's really known in the popular world as the person who did Blackula in the Black Exploitation 1972 film. uh, with that voice, because he had a voice like Othello's, and he appeared in cartoons and other Pee-wee's Playhouse, and he was in the Star Trek television series. He was very big. He was 6'5", had a bass voice, born in Gary, and he was a wonderful, wonderful Othello. I never saw him. I met Mr. Marshall when I was out in LA because he was still around, and I was helping him adapt a play by a South African writer. And I never saw him do Othello, but I saw him do some of the other works as well. He also performed in several Shakespeares on the stage in US and Europe, including Othello. And he was portrayed, Harold Hobson of the Sunday Times praised his portrayal of Othello as the best one of our time. The people who came to his funeral to deliver his eulogy included Sidney Poitier and Ivan Dixon, Paul Winfield, and Marla Gibbs. There was a very interesting period when I suddenly started coming into the business back in the 60s and 70s during the Civil Rights Movement, and there was a reflection of Blacks playing the bard during that time in the public theater, which was, at that time, it was coming into its own. And they attempted to create a Black Shakespeare experience at the public. And they did. It went through two wonderful productions that had some names that you might have heard of. They did, the first one they did was Julius Caesar, and this guy named Ben Haley, who I went to at Yale, and Earl Hyman was in that production, Frank Adu, some other folks play. And then a guy, you may have heard of named Morgan Freeman was in that production. They did another production after Julius Caesar of Coriolanus. It was an all-Black production of Coriolanus that also had Morgan Freeman and Gloria Foster and Earl Hyman and C.C.H. Pounder and Jose Santillana and Michelle Shea, a very dear friend of mine, Count Stovall, who we have shared the screen on several occasions, Dennis Tate, and a young guy who was coming into his own. I don't know if you ever heard of him. His name was Denzel Washington. And they were all in a wonderful production of Coriolanus, which I had a chance to see. It was quite great. There's a whole bunch of other folks who were in that because it was an all-Black production. It's quite wonderful. And then one of the other folks who is well known for his portrayals on the stage, but also his portrayals in the film and on television and commercials, what I think is probably the most important and versatile actor that we have in America, a guy named James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones is soon going to be honored because he is going to be have a Broadway theater named after him. One of only two African Americans to have a theater named after him. James Earl Jones is one, will be soon, and the other is, of course, August Wilson, the famous playwright. We know James Earl Jones again, the way we know William Marshall, because of his voice, because he has one of the most distinctive and versatile actors, and he's had a career spanning over 6 decades. He's had much success in fields of entertainment. He's one of the few performers who's won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. He's been said to possess one of the best known voices in show business. He's known, his voice is known as Darth Vader. He was the voice of CNN for years. He's now, and for the modern generation, he is known in The Lion King as the father in The Lion King. But on stage, he's acted in various works of William Shakespeare, one of the best known Shakespearean actors of our time. And he's taken on roles like Othello. He's played Othello 6 times, and King Lear, and in Midsummer Night's Dream, and Measure for Measure, and Claudius and Hamlet. He received in 2002, he received the Kennedy Center Honors at the John F. Kennedy Center in DC. And among the other honorees were Paul Simon, Elizabeth Taylor, and Chita Rivera. Think of that: Othello, King Lear, Hamlet, Troilus and Cressida, Coriolanus, Winter's Tale, Merchant of Venice, he all portrayed in that. In the summer of 1990, there was a young actor that we've already talked about in Coriolanus called Denzel Washington. In 90, Denzel came back to the theater and did At the Public, same place that he had done Coriolanus, Richard III. In 2005, he appeared on stage as Brutus in the Broadway production of Julius Caesar again. Despite mixed reviews, the production's limited run was a consistent sellout. Washington has portrayed characters in the in this last year, the film adaptation of William Shakespeare's tragedy, The Scottish Play. He received universal acclaim for his performance and was nominated for several awards, including an Academy Award, a Golden Globe Award, a Satellite Award, a Screen Actors Guild Award. So Denzel, who is primarily known as an actor of film and going back to starting off in television, he's won 2 Academy Awards, one for Best Actor, one Best Supporting Actor. He's been nominated 8 times, but he also has his time on the stage doing the Bard. Now, why? Well, part of it is that when you do the Bard, it is a way of proving that you are as good an actor as there is on the planet or in the country. And that was important because as we go back to where we started with this in terms of talking about African Americans playing the Bard, and one of the reasons it was important for that to happen was that it demonstrated not to Black folks. Black folks know about we know about our humanity, but it demonstrated to white folks that Black folks were as good as whites. And that was important to prove. It was an important thing to prove with the kind of background coming out of slavery, coming out of a system that was designed to denigrate and to dehumanize Black people. So the participation of Blacks in Shakespeare is not only a creative act, is not only an important thing in terms of getting your acting chops, it's also a political statement. It's a political statement to the world. It's a political statement, particularly to white supremacists here in our own country, that we are as good as anybody, as good as any other actors, and that we're able to use those same kinds of tools that all actors, have, if they're fortunate, have the opportunity to do. Now, you may notice that I didn't mention, except for Gloria Foster and some other folks, a lot of women. Well, part of that is not because there aren't wonderful actresses. I mean, they're absolutely outstanding actresses. But most of that is because of what? It's because of Shakespeare himself. I mean, there aren't a lot of great roles. There aren't a lot of great roles for women. One of the most, in the Shakespearean plays, one of the most important was one of my teachers, named Fran Dorn, who was a member, one of the 6 members of the company, of the Shakespeare Company down in DC, who did 2 or 3 Shakespearean plays every year for over 10 years. Fran Dorn, and then she moved on, and Audra McDonald, who is, you may have heard of, is a woman who has won 6 Tony Awards, also dipped her toes into the pool of Shakespearean drama. She played Twelfth Night in the Delacorte, the same public theater that Denzel came out of, and Morgan Freeman. And she also played Lady Percy in Henry IV. Audra McDonald, she didn't win Academy Awards for it, and she didn't win Tonys for it, but she certainly learned her skills coming out of Juilliard and becoming the most awarded, not Black, the most awarded actress ever to do shows on Broadway, with many, many nominations and 6 full Tonys. She's the only one also to win a Tony in every acting category. I'm going to kind of stop there. I think we said we would get to this point and kind of open it up for questions. There are, of course, let me not stop there. Let me add something. We're past the days of Uncle Tom's Cabin. We're past the days of minstrel shows and blackface. We're not yet past the white supremacy that framed the experiences of Black actors for the better part of the 20th century. We're still in that struggle, but more and more now we find casting is open, so that it is not just Aaron Moore, and it is not just Othello that's being done. It is being Black folks are playing all kinds of roles. There's a wonderful role right now, a wonderful play going on right now, of Merchant of Venice with a brother playing, excuse me. I'm going to use some of my medicine. Who was playing Shylock. Wonderful, winning all kinds of acclaim and reviews. I myself, like I said, have directed Shakespeare, have directed the Shakespeare at the Palmer. Palmer is an art museum we have here for 4 seasons, and have performed in many. And so there is an openness to the mindset of all of us in terms of the appropriateness of people of color playing different roles. As a matter of fact, that openness that was kind of, has been developed through the development of Black folks playing Shakespeare has been open, so that there are all kinds of folks doing stuff that, non-gendered roles. There are many Hamlets who happen to be gendered female, and there's a couple of wonderful productions of all women doing shows, so that this notion of approaching character development, character portrayal has been, I think, helped along by us as people, as a culture, as a country, looking at how do you open up drama? I mean, none of us in America are English. We're all Americans. So anybody doing, I know you know this, that Shakespeare was an English playwright. And most of the people in America who do Shakespeare are not English. They are American. And so by the very nature of doing it, there is an opening up, an expanding of the ideas of the bard. And I think that African Americans, particularly in the latter part of the 20th century, were very much a part of that movement and that progression. I'm looking forward to, in my old age, I am looking forward to seeing what kind of new vistas are going to be opened up by other actors who are coming into it and doing all kinds of things with the bard. So thank you, brothers and sisters, for your time. And let's open it up for questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Charles. To start off, I have a question from Hannah Laura Noble. Can you talk a little bit about the personal courage of Paul Robeson after he was ostracized for his supposed communist sympathies, despite being celebrated throughout the USA during his centennial?
Yep, absolutely. I was fortunate enough. Let me sort of answer that. Something before that, I was asked by Harry Belafonte to participate in that centennial at Carnegie Hall in celebration of Brother Paul Robeson. I looked at the program, and I was the only one whose name was on the program that I didn't recognize. It was Harry Belafonte and Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and Whoopi Goldberg and Muhammad Ali, and the names, and Charles Dutton, and names went on and on. And then there was this guy down there, Charles Dumas, and I'm going, who is that? But anyway, Paul Robeson is one of my heroes. I was very blessed to have met him. In Chicago, I had a friend who knew him, named Oscar Brown Jr., who was sort of left-leaning, progressive Black theater person himself. And Paul Robeson, who was, as you know, blacklisted and wasn't allowed to perform publicly for many years, came over to Oscar's house, and I was able to sit basically at his feet and listen to that wonderful voice. Is amazing. But he showed courage, courage beyond courage. Paul Robeson, before World War II, was probably the most well-known person on the planet. I mean that. I mean, more than Roosevelt, more than Churchill. you know, more than those folks, because Robeson went around all around the world, and he was a working class hero, and he went around and he learned uh, almost 30 languages he sang songs in, and he learned to speak conversationally in over 12. And so he went around the world and he talked to people's language. He was very much involved, for instance, in the Spanish Civil War, in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. So he was the most well-known um, American, most well-known person, I would say. But then World War II came. And in World War II, for those of you who none of us remember, but those of us who know, uh, the United States and the Soviet Union beat the Nazis, you know, and the fascists in Italy. There was a combined effort to bring down the Nazis and the fascists. After the war, there was a competition for control, and it was a control. One could argue it was an economic control, but it was also an ideological control. So that the Soviet Union was communist based, and the United States was capitalist based. And Robson basically said, "This is foolish," and he was accused of being a communist. And he never denied being a communist, but he also said that you have no right to tell me how to believe, you know? And in order for him to continue to participate as an actor, as a singer, as a world figure, they wanted him to turn in those friends of his that he had gone to meetings with, if he had gone to meetings at all. They wanted him to turn on his friends, and he refused to do it. And because he refused to do it, he was denied his passport, he was denied the ability to travel, and he was blacklisted. And he spent a good portion, and the highlight of his career, as someone who was the most famous person in the planet who was not allowed to earn a living. Uh, it was he ultimately came back, of course, and the Supreme Court gave him his passport back, but by then his career had, you know, he'd gone around the edge, let us say. Um, but the fact that he showed courage to the end, he showed courage all through his career, so that this man, again, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but the most important man, the most well-known man, most well-known celebrity, uh, who was used during World War II, by the way, by the Americans, you know, to help rally the troops, you know, to fight the Nazis, was used that way. But at the same time, the anti-communists, so-called anti-communists, turned on him and took away his livelihood.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from Charles Lumpkins. He
Mhm.
asks, can you give further details on how Ira Aldridge seemingly burst upon the Shakespearean stage in Europe, and was he considered a threatening presence to established actors who had played Othello?
It's very interesting. He was considered a threatening presence in America because he didn't play Othello in America, and he was not, as I said, the African Grove folks, you know, got run out of town by the competition. But when Ira Aldridge went to Europe, he was treated with more respect. He was he was um, he was able to get around Europe. As a matter of fact, I just now, literally just now, thought there's a little bit of Ira Aldridge in the Paul Robeson story, because he was able to get to Russia and Prussia at that time, so and people treated him with more respect and more dignity. Now, a lot of that has to do with the fact that in Europe they don't have the uh, tradition of chattel slavery. They didn't have the tradition. They had slavery, and they had issues of race. They still do, but they did not have the same kind of tradition and the need, because of the Christianity and the need because of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. They didn't have the need to create this system of white supremacy that existed in America, that we are still in the process of battling. They didn't have a need to do that. And so he was allowed to participate in the world of theater, and he learned his craft well. I'm not going to say there wasn't competition between he and Brutus and other folks, etc. But there wasn't the same kind of systematic racism that suppressed his ability to be able to play Shakespeare. And a part of it, I mean, that's also, there's also a kind of an exoticism, I mean, that existed as well. I mean, here's this Black man. I mean, not that Britain didn't know Black people. I mean, remember that there was a point when people said that the sun never set on the British Empire. And that's true, because they had part of people in Africa and India, and they had people all around the world, and they ran systems of imperialism and control. So it wasn't that they were foreign to folks of color, but it was a different kind of a manifestation of that in England. And it certainly was very different in Poland. It didn't have an empire in Africa or India or other places of color. So he had a rough time. He was also, I mean, part of it, he was good, the man was good. It's interesting. It's a great question. There's a part of it, for instance, if you think about what is that wonderful group that comes out of Korea, the K-pop folks, who are really good at what they do, and basically they're singing. What is the name of that group? Does anybody know? Somebody out there, Carol?
3 initials, B something something.
Yeah, but they are doing stuff that is based in hip hop, and they barely speak English, but they are the best, as declared by the Grammys and everybody else, the best group doing something which should be, it is competitive with what's going on in America in terms of hip hop. But we look at them and we kind of go, this is, K-pop is like popular and makes money and it's fun and it's good. And I think Ira Aldridge was popular and he made money and he was good. I don't know if that's a strange answer, but that's my answer.
Thank you. We have time for just a few more questions. So this next question is from David Coslow.
Let me interrupt. It was BTS is who I'm talking about.
This next question is from David Coslow from the ESU Desert Branch. He is asking about the play The Octoroon by Dion Boucicault, which is considered by many to be the first instance of showing dilution of Black blood through miscegenation and how it plays into personhood. He's wondering if there are any scenography studies of the December 2nd, 1859 New York production or of its 1862 London production that had the happy ending.
Well, I want to say I don't know. That's what I want to say. First of all, I'm not sure of the history of those productions. I know the play, of course. African Grove, not African Grove, but Black theater companies have attacked it of late, and folks have done it back then. I'm not sure of that history. I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the nature of the question. Are you saying it's the first time that we have become aware of the British, the New York and the London productions, first time it be publicly known? Because certainly the theme of mixed blood has been around for a very long time in terms of not only theater. It's a key issue in the construction of white supremacy. That what is the effect of intermarriage? What is the effect of cross-culturalization on the identity of white folks and the identity of Black folks, but primarily the identity of white folks. But I can't give you a definitive answer relative to the effect of those productions. I'm not that familiar with it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Nefertiti Burton.
Oh, what a great question.
Would you please discuss Shakespeare's language and how its rhythms are compatible with Black American dialects?
It's very interesting, because no less a person than Orson Welles, who, of course, created the production of the Voodoo Macbeth on the WPA back in the day, using Black folks to do Shakespeare, said that the language of Black people, which is African-based and Southern-based, was probably closer to what Shakespeare intended than the way other people sort of butcher the language. So that the cadences and the style, and I think the spirituality, which is a very strange thing to talk about with Shakespeare, but the kind of internal spirituality that exists is more effective coming out of the Black experience and the Black language. I mean, if you listen to Paul Laurence Dunbar, who writes in iambic pentameter the way Shakespeare writes in iambic pentameter, and if you listen to Go and Quit That Noise, Miss Lucy, put that music book away. Ain't no use to sense of crying, tell your trying, tell your day. I mean, it's iambic pentameter as pure as the bard would write. So yeah, I think that it's interesting, that's an interesting question, Nefertiti, that the notion, I mean, Shakespeare being at the top of the heap in terms of drama in the language, that the notion of these people, we people who were less than human and less than intellectually stimulated, are probably more adept at the word, at the saying of the words, that the ear, our ears hear the way that the Elizabethans, heard from the stage. A very profound question. Yeah, okay, sorry.
All right, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. And I would like to thank everyone for their questions. This will end the Q&A session. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the ESU Executive Director, Karen Karpowicz, to say a few words.
Thank you, Charles. It was really a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I learned so much. And it was wonderful remembering some of those productions, which I actually did see at the Public Theater in New York. I'm old enough to remember some of them. And thank you all. And thank you, the Central Pennsylvania branch, Karen Blair Brand and Jill Campbell. You obviously have a treasure there, and you should be proud of having him as part of your university. I also want to thank the Happy Hour Committee, which, as Elizabeth said, is completely curated by our branches. So again, if you have any ideas for speakers, please get back to us with your ideas. The other thing that I wanted to mention was the fact that the ESU is a member organization. So if you would like to join us as a member, please go again to the form that was mentioned, and there is an ability to become a member of the ESU. We do encourage you to do that. I'm also going to ask you to join us again for our next happy hour speaker, where we're going to take another turn, and we're going to go back to the roots of the ESU 100 years ago. And James Stebbings is joining us again, and this time he's going to be talking not about Gilbert and Sullivan, but about the Lusitania and World War I. So please join us then. And in the meantime, thank you again, Professor Dumas, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Let me just say thank you for inviting me. I am honored to be able to sit here and talk about this stuff, and I'm honored that there are people who are willing and happy to listen. But thank you for inviting me. I'm honored.
Yeah, and you've come a perfect week, because I don't know if maybe you know this, but Monday was our Shakespeare competition. And you performed in a perfect week for us. So thank you. Bye.